Okay, so Luz Martinez,
Not present.
Roseanne Ibarra or Faith Dayton,
Not present.
Lisa Judd,
Present.
Jacqueline Williams,
Present.
Kate Gaston or Tony Marsh, Libby Guthrie,
Present.
Paul Davis, Xenia Levachel, Karen Lovato, Blythe Post or Brady Nord. I thought I saw Blythe in here.
Yeah, Blythe.
Oh,
But not anymore. Oh, I'm letting her in now.
okay. There we go. Amanda Archer or Joanna Olson.
I'm here, and Joanna Olson's retired now, just for an update for you guys.
Just one, sorry.
There we go.
That's okay.
Updated. Judy Albert.
Here.
Camille Schrader or Sage Wolf.
Page's connection to audio.
I see them.
So you can,
I'm gonna mark them as here. Dan McIntyre or Ryan LaRue.
Here.
Noble Wadlick.
Here.
Rachel McDavid. And Sandra Stolfi, I see you. And then do I go on to the?
Nope.
Okay, cool.
And
Thank you.
my apologies, I was bumped out and then brought in, but Blythe Post is here.
We got you.
Thanks.
we have a quorum.
Okay, is there any public comment? Cannot hear any public comment. We're going to go on to the approval of the minutes for the November 15th, 2021 COC board meeting. Is there any discussion on that? If there's no corrections or discussion, we need a motion to approve them as presented.
I move to approve the minutes of November.
Thanks, Judy.
I second.
Thanks, Sage. Roll call, Carly?
Let's see, to approve the November 15th minutes. Lisa Judd,
Yes.
Jacqueline Williams,
Yes.
Libby Guthrie,
Abstain.
Blythe Post,
Yes.
Amanda Archer,
Yes.
Judy Albert,
Yes.
Sage Wolf,
Yes.
Noble Wadlick.
Yes.
Oh, I skipped down. I'm sorry. Dan McIntyre.
Yes.
And Sandra Stolfi. Is she still here?
Yes. Just a second. We can't hear you.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to pause and welcome Kate Gaston. She just joined. Carly, if you could mark her in as well. Kate, we just had a motion to approve the November 15th
Good.
agenda, minutes. Would you like to say yes, no, or abstain?
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. Veronica, do you want us to do the full membership meetings now, or do you want to do it at the next one?
I prefer to do it at the full membership meeting so that everyone
Right,
has
we're
the
just gonna go-
opportunity, but I
We're gonna
wanted to
go
present them.
past it, yeah. All right, so we're gonna go down to reports and presentations. We're gonna skip the first one because I know Noble's got a conflict. So we're gonna go to the city of Ukiah really quickly on item B.
I don't have anything really to report other than what I think Megan Van Sant's gonna talk about the homeless encampment protocol stuff. But other than that, nothing new to report.
Okay, thank you, Noble. Was there any questions for Noble? Okay, no questions. We're gonna go back to the county of Mendocino. Is Megan here, Veronica? I don't see her on my screen.
In here, I'll IM her and see.
Okay, we'll skip Megan for a second. We'll go to city of Fort Bragg. Is there anybody from the city of Fort Bragg with an update? I'm not seeing anybody from the city of Fort Bragg. We will skip to Paul from city of Point Arena. I don't see Paul on my screen though.
No, I don't think he's present today.
No, I do not see him. Is Megan coming? Do you want to come back to this one?
Can we circle back to it?
Yeah, we can come back to it. Oh, there she is.
Hi, Megan.
Hey,
Thank you
Megan.
for joining.
Time for your report for
Oh
county.
my gosh,
Mendocino.
really? That
Yeah.
fast? I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. So report from the county. The only thing I really wanted to highlight on the county side was our progress in developing a homeless encampment coordination protocol, which is attached in your packet. This is a draft. This is a goal that's actually included in our strategic plan. I can't remember what item number, but it is in there as an intended outcome of the strategic plan. And the intention of this document is to highlight communication around encampments. So I want to make that really clear to the COC. This is not about whether or not an encampment is disbanded, but how the law enforcement agency and the county, in this case, communicate about that process. So this protocol has been reviewed by county council on the county side, not on the law enforcement side. I didn't quite realize there was opposing councils within the same organization. So it's partially through a county council review process. Noble can speak to the status on the city of Ukiah side. And then it's also been shared with the sheriff's office. So I'm kind of like reaching out to the different law enforcement organizations one by one to get an agreement on this coordination protocol. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or comments, or if Chief Weidelek wants to weigh in.
I'll just say that good.
Megan, could you give just the briefest synopsis of what that coordination looks like? I don't know why I did not read all of it.
Probably because it's on like page 80 and you were like, what are all
You
these
are
pages,
right. That is exactly why I didn't read it.
Ryan puts lots of detail and stuff, and then like, my thing is like way at the end. So what has happened over the last 2 or 3 years, probably 2.5 years, our team gets notified from time to time by law enforcement agencies that they're going to be engaging in some sort of process at a homeless encampment. And this has been, we've been contacted by Ukiah Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, Caltrans, CHP, and I feel like there was somebody else, so I can't remember. Maybe it's just those 3. So different law enforcement organizations have notified us in fairly haphazard ways, with the exception of UPD, which has been the most organized on this. And then typically we have sent our team out to the encampment ahead of time. check in with the residents, let them know this is happening. And then if there's an official notification, so again, part of our strategy is that different law enforcement organizations seem to approach this differently. But in a traditional format, a law enforcement agency would notify an encampment that there was going to have to be disbanded. 72 hours, they give them like these official notices, and then 72 hours later, people are expected to be gone. And so we would also go out in between the time between the notification and the disbandment date, talk to the residents. And sometimes we have been invited and we have felt comfortable being present on the date of disbandment as well. So for our team, this has been we've got a lot of experience now. I mean, a lot is, so there's been 8 over the last 2.5 years countywide. So, but the intent of the protocol is to kind of put this into a clear practice so that when I win the lottery and Chief Weidelek wins the lottery, somebody else has some other way to know how we do this.
Mhm. Okay,
But it is really clear that from our perspective here as county social services people with a homeless outreach team, we do not make decisions about whether or not an encampment is disbanded. That's not our call to make. We don't engage in that. It's after the decision has already been made, how to create a more humane process for the residents of that encampment.
okay, thank you.
So again, the point of bringing it to the COC is to make sure you're all aware of it. Totally open to feedback if there's something that you think we should be thinking about in incorporating into the protocol. And it's mostly an FYI, but I'm really looking for feedback, particularly if you see any like red flags that we need to be aware of.
I think Noble had a comment.
I think Megan covered it pretty elegantly. I just, my thought is that the benefit is that everybody who is the subject of a disbandment, which obviously is usually the law enforcement's decision to move forward. I see the benefit in everybody being treated equally and fairly, so that if you're, engaged by the sheriff's office out in the county or the PD in the city limits, that we're all playing by the same rules and everybody kind of understands what the process for the disbandment would be and then how that would work and to make sure that we're all communicating.
Is there any other questions for Megan?
And I have a question. This is Sage.
Go
Or
ahead,
not a
Sage.
question, more just a comment. And I think that I did read the protocol, Megan, but I am looking at it now, but I don't remember if this detail was in there. But just about, I know one of the things that has happened in at least this last time that an encampment was broken up, that if whatever shelter is close by. So like if it's on the coast, if like Fort Bragg, or if it's inland, if the Ukiah shelter, if there's just part of the communication process that we get the notification as well, because we get people who come to B2 with so many questions. And this last time it wasn't as smooth as it had been in the past. So just making sure that we're linked into that communication about like, when is the, like if there's a notice that's being given out to the residents at that encampment, that it's being given to the local service providers as well, who may be working with clients who would be impacted, and for sure the shelters who will probably be seeing more of those people trying to seek shelter.
I think it's a great idea, Sage, and I can easily incorporate that into the protocol. I'll follow up with Chief Weidelek on whether he thinks it makes the most sense for the law enforcement to do that notification or for our team to do that notification. But I think that's a perfect thing to include in it. And I'm just not quite sure who would do it. So, but I can figure that part out.
So
Like, and also, because like information, like where, if their belongings are being stored for a period of time before disposed of, like it's really helpful if we have that information too, so that we can reinforce with the people who come to us and are complaining about their stuff being stolen, that like, no, your stuff wasn't stolen. It was picked up and you have an opportunity to get it back. And here's how you would do that. So that kind of information is super helpful too.
Right. What it sounds like is making sure that you get a copy of the notice itself. And now that I think about it, pardon?
Yeah.
Because the notice
Probably,
itself is supposed to contain that information. And now that I think about it, I don't think the protocol has the law enforcement agency giving the county a copy of that notice, but that would actually be helpful. So that would be an easy fix. I don't know, Chief White, like if you're thinking anything about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I thought we kind of went back and forth on including those as attachments to the protocol. And I'm thinking that's probably where it got, if it got left out, that's how it got left out. Because, we had talked about attachments, like the notice attachment. So that's a pretty easy fix.
Yeah.
So Megan, and again, I'm speaking from ignorance because I didn't read the protocol. So is there a place where the home team that normally deals with homeless, that they can go out beforehand and meet with people to help them strategize where they're going to go rather than just be dispersed into the community?
Well, that has been a function that our homeless outreach team has done. I do leave it. I need this protocol to have a lot of longevity. So the way it's written right now is the law enforcement organization makes a decision around a homeless encampment. They notify the county single point of contact, and we respond either saying, yes, our team will go do that outreach, exactly what you're talking about, Judy, like, working with people on like, this is going to happen. Let me come up with a plan and offer whatever resources we can. The second option would be is if we don't have the team available, we would do a warm handoff to a community-based organization who's willing to do that outreach with the agreement of law enforcement. And then the third option is that we decline to participate. And there might be a reason for that. And that was important for our county council, that if it's something that we're like not comfortable with, we leave opening to be able to say we're not going to participate and explain why.
Well, I think that's, I completely understand that. I think that what I'm just repeating what people always say about disbandments and, dispersals and things like that, which is many people just move to another place in the community and then become that person's problem.
Yeah, no, this is
right. And that is not in any way like a jab. I'm just saying that this just seems to be this universal,
right,
chasing our tail around this very difficult situation. I don't know.
No, and Judy, you're absolutely right. This is not addressing any kind of long-term, or this is not addressing the solution. This is actually not a solution for encampments.
Okay.
This is not a solution at all. It's, it's just addressing the communication and coordination when an encampment's being disbanded, which I agree. An encampment disbandment is not a long-term solution to encampments.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, we don't have a long-term solution yet. So it seems like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just picturing like what would happen if everybody sent out referrals to building bridges and they, they're already filled up, and it's
right.
Like they then turn them away, and then people who are homeless say, yeah, see, what's the use of
yeah. And Judy, I will say in our experience so far that a lot of they've been pretty varied, some of the encampments. So we had to respond to a request from CHP, and Veronica was actually pretty on the grounds with that. A request from CHP when people started camping in that, I want to call it a cloverleaf, and I don't know if that's the right term. It was a cloverleaf thing right in the middle of the highway. It was super dangerous. It was super dangerous for the people that were staying there, super dangerous for people that were driving by that might accidentally hit someone. I mean, it had to be eliminated very quickly. And so sometimes there's encampments where they're like, this needs to go because somebody's going to die really soon. And there's just not a lot of time for any kind of deep work there. There really isn't, because it's a pretty intense issue. And sometimes there's some things that are going on that are pretty strong environmental problems, like really big environmental degradation. And there isn't time to do any deep work with any of the residents there, because this situation is pretty critical.
Yeah, I agree.
So if there's no more questions or comment, and you're welcome to email me if you have some language that you want to include in here. I took a note, Sage, on what you suggested. I think that's a good idea. And this will just continue to wind through the process. That's all I have on the county side, I believe. Dan, you're muted if you're talking to us.
Yeah, I'm muted. I was on the other line. So we're going to move on to strategic planning. There was a doodle poll, and I think the last day to respond was today, right, Veronica? You're pulling my trick. You're muted too.
It was sent out, I believe today was the deadline to respond. I was focused on the point in time count all end of last week, so I'll finalize the meeting date before I leave today.
There is a meeting coming up here shortly. That's all I had to report on that. Shelters and solutions, Angelica?
Well, we did not meet this month. Last month, I gave a report out on our safe parking. The instructions I received were to two things: to draw up some kind of email to see if any organizations are out there that would engage in safe or manage a safe parking. But I think last I heard from Megan and Veronica was that they were going to connect with one another to see if that was an okay thing to do. So I've put that on hold. The other question or task was developing a question to collect data on vehicles and vehicle ownership to determine, are there folks that are unhoused that, how many are there out there that have vehicles? And the question I got also from Brian, if you're on there, was that this is a question that needs to go through the COC board, the HMIS committee, and the agencies that will be asking the questions. So at this point, I've kind of been stopped in terms of doing anything further on that until I get direction from the board on what to do.
Thank you.
So that's my report out. So until I get any further direction from the board on this issue, on these issues, and we're kind of at a standstill in terms of where to go from now.
Okay. I'm trying to find my agenda. Sorry about this.
It's me. I'm next for coordinated entry.
Okay, next is coordinated entry discharge planning stage.
So we've been really focused on the rapid rehousing implementation, working with the state technical assistance that's working with our community. They've been amazing. So we've been meeting more frequently as a, not necessarily as the coordinated entry committee, but as kind of our housing navigation team has been meeting more frequently, which is kind of a group of folks that come out of our coordinated entry work. And to talk about like how rapid rehousing is getting implemented with these new programs that are starting up, and how the existing rapid rehousing programs that we've had through RCS and Hospitality Center, how to make sure that it's all aligned, and that our coordinated entry process for rapid rehousing is aligned, and that our programs are complementing each other, and that's been going really well. So I imagine that we're going to be having our new rapid rehousing programs up and running. We're having a meeting next week to do our first coordinated entry I don't know what to call it at this point, because I don't like the case conferencing word. But essentially case conferencing for rapid rehousing coordinated entry. We'll figure out a different term for it probably. But historically in the past, our coordinated entry system has been a pull system. So when a housing project has an opening in their program, they will go to the coordinated entry by name list and do a poll of potential applicants off of that list. And now what we're going to be doing is with this rapid rehousing program as a pilot is doing a weekly meeting where all of the rapid rehousing providers would come to that meeting and with the number of openings that they have and be referred a household through the coordinated entry system. So it's a little different. It's good because it has more accountability, more structure to it, and more coordination. So like we can look at the people that we're serving beyond just the numbers that's prioritized on the by name list. So we can really do some more case management stuff and talking about like, okay, what agency is going to be the best to serve this household? What things may we not be considering for things like related to their screening? So really excited about that. I think that's the primary thing that we've been working on. It's just really important to get this all tightened up so that our new rapid rehousing programs are set up for success. That's all I got.
Any questions for Sage? All right, not hearing any questions. We're going to go on to Veronica, membership committee meeting.
Yeah, membership committee has been meeting regularly to explore the redesign of the board composition. We have an action item later in the agenda to discuss that. Just so you know, there is a handout in your packet that kind of summarizes what the membership committee has come up with. It is page 68 of your packet. So, and I put in the chat a link to the packet if you don't have it. We're going to meet for our next regularly scheduled meeting. I think it's this Wednesday, but let me pull up my calendar really quick. Well, we're supposed to meet and we'll be scheduling a meeting in the next few weeks for our regularly scheduled meeting. And that's my report.
Any questions from Veronica on that? Hearing no questions, we're going to go down to HMIS performance measurement. Is Brian here today?
Brian is in a union negotiation meeting today until 2 o'clock. And those things usually have a tendency to run over. So I'm going to take a stab at it. But I really haven't looked at things. So, but I can talk about stuff. There is included in your packet the data completeness report card for January last month. My understanding from Ryan is things are improving. There's growth, there's more engagement in the trainings that we've been offered. And things are going pretty good with monitoring of the data and data quality and things like that, and completeness. I'm going to skip this next item because it's going to take a little bit longer, and I'm going to go to number 3 and then come back to 2. The HMIS data tribal affiliation is something that we wanted to bring up. Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority, Manchester Band of Pomo Indians, I believe is the full name, and I apologize, I don't know the full name of the tribe off the top of my head, but I believe it's Giddyville. Those 3 entities that are within Mendocino County, they have been awarded ESG CV funds through a tribal allocation that the State Housing Community Development, or HCD, created. So they are exploring using HMIS. Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority has approached the county as the HMIS lead about using our HMIS for their projects. We have no problem with that. We really want to grow the equity and representation of all of our HMIS data. So Brian's excited about that. And so they have requested that there be a data element added to their projects whenever data is collected on a client. They've requested that there be a drop down that pops up or is in reference to anytime someone self-identifies as Native American or Native Alaskan, to collect their tribe affiliation. Northern Circle has requested that we do the tribes that are within Mendocino County, and that we have an other and then a fill-in box as well, I believe. I could be mistaken on that. And Brian not only wanted to update the COC on this development, he also wanted to find out if the COC board would be interested in exploring adding that data element to their projects as well. So for ESG or COC funded projects, do we want to expand identifying tribal affiliation when someone self-identifies? What do you guys think of that idea? Kate's nodding.
I mean, I
think
think if it's
it's
going
a
to bring
good
more
idea.
services to our families, yeah, absolutely. It can't hurt. And then obviously people that opt out of selecting that would do so.
And it wouldn't be asked of every person. It would be only those who self-identify with that racial category. Kind of wondering if we could get, well, Libby gave us a thumbs up, but the main thing that came up when the HMIS committee discussed this was it would require additional training. And so we kind of wanted to get input of those projects that would actually be collecting this data. So I'm wondering if maybe Sandra or Sage or Libby or somebody wants to weigh in. Do you foresee any issues if we were to look into this?
What
So
would
for-
that additional training look like? I don't know what that means. What does that entail?
So not only are we going to need to train on what the data questions are, we're going to need to train on how to ask the question and how to be culturally competent and respectful. And so it's not just another data element to ask. And so there would need to be some additional expansion more than just our normal data kind of questions, like what's a social security number? How do you ask that? Well, you ask what's your social security number, but which tribe are you affiliated with is a way different type of a question to ask someone. It may not seem like it at the surface, but whenever you're working with someone who's in a very vulnerable place, and we just treat this kind of question as a one-off, as it's just the same as everything else, it could actually be very, very insensitive and inappropriate. And so we need to be careful whenever we bring in questions that have more than just a data collection connotation to it.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I can't imagine why we wouldn't do it.
There is technical assistance being given to these tribes and tribal entities. The same team has reached out to Brian and I about providing training on how to partner and with these independent jurisdictions and these tribes, because they're their own entities, and it's different than we would be dealing with, a nonprofit or even a city or even a different county. And so we're going to get some technical assistance around that. And so it sounds like everybody's on board to go ahead and have us move forward with exploring that.
So Veronica, so it's the tribal members who are receiving this money who are asking for these new data points, right?
Yes.
So would not they also be the ones who might know how to ask the question?
Yes. And so that's definitely something that we would include in our development of this. That's the major item that I see that needs to be addressed in order for us to move forward with this kind of a change. So we would work with them, but we would need further assistance, I think, because it's not their responsibility to teach us how to interact with them. It's our responsibility to learn that.
Yes.
So Judy, I think of it as like the Native families I'm serving.
Go ahead. You're muted, Jackie.
I was thinking like the families we serve that are Native. The training would come, it would help my team.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be beneficial to more than just how to collect this one HMIS data element. It's going to provide more staff development than that.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
All right, thank you, Brian. You want to come back on the second thing when Brian gets here?
Yeah, I kind of do.
We can do
If we
that.
could circle back.
Yeah, we can do that. Is there any comments or questions, any additional questions on 1 or 3 on section E? If not, we'll circle back to Brian when Brian gets here on item 2. Okay. We'll go to the next ad hoc committee report, 2022 point in time count.
Well, the point in time count was held last Thursday morning. We surveyed as many people as we could find who were experiencing homelessness on the night of Wednesday, February 23rd. I think that it went really well. I'm gonna, as you guys know, we split it into 3 regions: coastal, inland north, inland south. One thing that Brian shared with me whenever he was looking at the data, he said that we got more coverage in the Willits area, at least according to the map of where people were identified. It was better coverage than we've ever had before. I know inland, you guys covered all your areas. I really haven't had a chance to debrief with everybody, but Amanda's here and she's our team captain for Inland South. How'd it go, Amanda?
It was fantastic. We had a great turnout of volunteers who were just ready to dig in and try the new app out, which I think everybody felt like it was very successful. I know for me, I was able to figure out how to give instructions and get people going with minimal help from Brian. So that tells you it's pretty user-friendly if I can figure it out. So we had just a moment of technical difficulty in the beginning, but it was quickly resolved. People got out there. It was really neat for me staying on site and being the command center. So the app calls it, to actually see in real time the pinpointing of people counting individuals right on the map. I just am really excited to see what the data brings this time. And we did have one gentleman who had lived experience that joined as well, which was fantastic because I know that was harder coming out of COVID to get that going. And teamed with McCavan to get Narcan out there and test strips. I hope we'll do that forever and ever and ever and ever. It was well accepted out on the street. There was even an anecdotal story about one of our teams going out and there was a drug deal happening right there in front of them and they gave the test strips out so that people could use safely. So I just hope we'll forever do that. I don't know. I know Megan was there and there might be some others. If there's anything you'd like to add, Libby was there.
I'll just chime in that I loved the app. I mean, it was really, really easy to use. And that was fun.
I did the driving on my team, but but the app was, the other two ladies were using the app very easily. And so I was like, yay! I just kept moving around and turning and they were just adding the info.
I thought it was amazing, the synchronicity. It had to be one of the coldest nights of the year. It's freezing.
Yeah, it was. So any other questions?
I
or
know when
comments?
when I arrived there at 5 a.m., it was 21 degrees and it was only like 25 degrees 2 hours later.
Mhm.
Outside doing interviews. It was, yeah, I thought about that, Judy, like that morning. I go, are we kidding?
I know. Jeez.
Well, where you were, when you start heading up over the hill into the mountains, it's pretty cold up there.
Oh my gosh, it was
Yeah.
something.
There was snow and brook trails.
Wow.
The sheltered count is going really well because we know who they were and we've kind of captured that information. There's not a big, huge rush like there is with the unsheltered street count. We were able to leverage HMIS for our sheltered point in time count for all projects except for two agencies, well, one agency and one half, like part of it, because their programs aren't currently participating in HMIS. And so they were able to use the app to gather information on and gather and report in information on people staying in their projects. Project Sanctuary was given a spreadsheet or this really cool tool that SimTech created for victim service providers so that they can keep all of their personally identifying information locally on their computer. And they're able to use this to spit out the reports that are needed for our HUD reporting. And there's no personal identifying information on it. And it puts it all in the format that we need. So not only I think was it easier for Judy not to have to do a million sheets of paper on every single person. Hopefully, we haven't really had a chance to debrief too much, but I know Carly was working with them pretty closely. But that way we could get the information in a format that we can synthesize easier and faster as well.
Yeah.
How'd it go, Judy?
Yeah, well, and actually I'm not the one who does the actual head counts, and so we had, a coast person and the transition person, another shelter person. And so, I mean, we probably made quite a few phone calls back and forth to Carly, but, it seems like it worked well and it was helpful. It was nice, when we finally accessed the report and saw that there was no names and just, genders, ages, identities, etc. So yeah, it worked really well. It was very smooth and very nice. So thank you, Carly and Veronica, for always being available. They sounded very exhausted when I called them the day of the pit count and it was 4 o'clock. They sounded like they both needed to go get home and get a good night's sleep.
We did go home shortly after that. I stayed longer than Carly did. I sent Carly home. So we need to meet again to debrief and create an executive summary. So I'll be calling that meeting soon. It's not scheduled, but we had to get through the count first. So that's our ad hoc report.
Thank you, Veronica. Appreciate the update. Glad to hear everything went good. Is there any questions for Veronica? Okay, if not, we're going to move on to section E of the meeting because Brian's not here still. So in June, we need to move the June meeting either backwards to the 13th or forward to the 20th. Well, actually that's backwards. Forward to the 13th or backwards to the 27th. I don't know if people have a preference. I always like going further into the month. That's my personal preference, but
We usually like that too,
It makes it easier.
especially since we skipped July. Oh, are we skipping July? Maybe we aren't skipping July.
No, we're
No.
not skipping July.
Oh, okay.
July is a general, I think.
So we'll meet on May 16th. And then we'll meet again July 18th.
So I would suggest we go to the 27th. Does everybody concur that work? I see some thumbs up.
The 27th of July, I'm sorry.
June.
Oh, June.
June, oh, okay.
So we can observe Juneteenth National Independence Day.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll be on the 27th. Okay. No questions on that. We're going to move on to item 2. Veronica, if you want to give like a brief update of how we ended up looking at this board composition from that, and then I'll go into the details of the meeting and the conversations that took place there.
Yeah. So as the board is aware, we were involved in a audit from the state of California's auditor's office. It was of certain counties that act as the COC's administrative entity or collaborative applicant, depending on you're talking HUD, federal or state. And one of the findings that they had was that in their interpretation of the federal regulations, that we were out of compliance with them because we didn't have wide representation on our board of this long list that's in the federal statute. We, the membership committee worked back with the HUD Ask a Question tool. And I also went to our HCD ESG rep, who is very, very knowledgeable in both state and federal regulations. And both HUD's Ask a Question and our HCD rep both confirmed that what the auditor was saying was what our COC general membership needs to be representative of, not our board. And so we were completely in compliance, but we were still requested by the auditor's office to bring it to the board and for discussion. And so that's kind of how it started out. And I'm going to share my screen on page 68 of your packet. You have a handout that the membership committee came up with. And so do you want to kind of talk about it now? Or you want me to keep going?
No, I can talk about it now. All right. So what we did is, as I typically do, Dan likes to go down rabbit holes, whether he's at work or any place. And so I went down this rabbit hole looking at the configurations of all the boards, every COC in the state of California. And at first I started reading a lot, and that was problematic because it would have took me months to read every single governance charter. But what I started to do was just look at the different size of the boards across the state. And the size of the boards varied anywhere from 7 to 29. And surprisingly enough, what I found is there's no correlation between board size and county size. Take, for example, Los Angeles has a 7-member board. The average, if you were to take and remove the outliers, the average boards were between 11 and 14 members, somewhere in that range, a lot more closer to 11 than higher than that. There was a lot of 9s, there was quite a few 7s. So as we went through this process and started talking about this concept, was that there's always the perception out there that a lot of individuals, well, there's always the perception and there's a conflict at most times when we're doing grants, and Veronica can confirm this, that a lot of times the reviewing of the committees a reviewing of grant awards is allocated to a smaller group that aren't applying for them. So as we hash this back and forth, and Kate was at the meeting, then Kate can fill in. And there's other people in the membership meeting, but we thought that, you know, in response to the state auditor, it might be a good time to look at the actual size of the voting membership at the board level, not the general membership. The general membership, we still want to get as many members as possible, but readjust the board size to 12 instead of the current size. That would make it easier for quorums. It would also incentivize more activity at the committee level where the work's actually being done versus the board level. And then there would be configuration on here as such that there would be rotation. Now, this is just the first draft of this. There would have to be some other governance charter changes that would have to take place to trigger how this configuration works, possibly. But Kate, I don't know if you, Kate, or well, anybody else that was at the meeting, if you guys want to add something, or Veronica, if I missed something.
There. You know, I think you're stating it really well, Daniel. We've talked at length. It's always the dilemma of who needs to be on the committee, on this group, and then how large on the board, and how large does it get. But I think we were trying to look at having a different balance of representation without being oversized. I do agree it's a problem when you have to have a balance on making sure you will get a quorum, because I have boards that are like 6 or 7 members and never get a quorum. But when you have a large board, you're trying to include everybody. I guess my real concern is that we set it up where there's a lot of rotation that goes on, so that maybe your population isn't represented for the next 2 years, but then they're represented after that. Yeah, but no, you're doing a great job, Dan.
And when she says represented, that's at the voting level of the board. What we saw too in this, and what's surprising to me is that at some of the different counties, and I don't recall them right off the top of my head, but some of the different counties had actually two types of boards, right? They had an executive board, which was say 5 to 6 members, and then they had another board that was say 8 or 9 members, and then they had the general membership. But what we saw in a lot of the boards, there was a lot more committee activity where there was less board members per se on the committees, and there was more members on the committees. Right now, a lot of our committees are made up of board members versus bringing in additional insight from non-board member seats. So I just think that this might be a time to address the perception. And I'm not saying this is the case, but I know when I first started on the board, there was a perception that, you know, we were all voting on our own stuff. We know that's not the case, because, you know, Veronica and Megan are very diligent about making sure that there's no conflicts of interest when we're doing the rating and ranking committees. But sometimes those perceptions are hard to fight, whether they're out there or not. I mean, Jackie and Kate know this from any board we sit on, right? If there's an interest that crosses, there's a perception of a conflict. And
yeah, you know, I'm not sure how well it's doing, but the Policy Council on Children and Families went to this on having their board meets at, you know, every other month or so, and then having committees working all along on doing things together. I haven't been on that long enough to assess if that's doing what it needs to do. I do know that they seem to have a lot of missing positions on their board membership. So I don't know what that means, but there's another, they're also using this. Not as often does the full board, does the board, a smaller group meet, but these committees that are doing a lot of the work are meeting regularly.
How many current board members are there? Since I haven't been a board member for a couple of years, I'm not sure. How many are on the current board?
We currently have 18 seats.
Oh, okay.
There's technically 19 because social services is a member of the board, but doesn't have a vote.
Okay.
Megan or I. So there's 18 active seats.
And sorry, Megan, go ahead. Or sorry, Veronica, go ahead.
It's okay. I just wanted to point out a couple little details. One is the membership committee thought that it would be best because there's an even number of seats to have the vice chair, what we currently call co-chair, to always have their vote, and that the chair would only vote in case of a tie, and that they wouldn't even be called in to vote. We also talked about representation of different ethnicities and special populations that currently aren't represented or underrepresented in our system. So there's some notes that you see under additional items for consideration. Some of my notes that I had that we had summarized, that I summarized from the meetings that we had. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask about that. That's all.
Dan, I see Camille's hand is up, I think.
Yes.
Yes, hi, can you hear
I
me?
can't see everybody. Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, hi. Yeah, this is always really difficult, complicated, complex work. So I appreciate the membership committee and the leadership working on this. I'm not exactly sure why 18 seats is too large. But having said that, the issue of conflict of interest, and I liked the way Dan talked about that, perceived conflict of interest. This feels really kind of heavily, if the only absolutely stationary seats are housing authority and housing developer, in addition to our individuals with lived experience, behavioral health, and then criminal justice, social services is probably the first recipient of those people who are homeless, right? They're the ones that have to do general assistance. They're the ones who have children and families that are homeless. They're the ones trying to figure out complex systems. So and then I wonder about, I don't know if it's schools or colleges or, when I think about our TAY population, I appreciate the at-large seats, but, as we spoke of last meeting, the ones that are stated seem to have precedence in this kind of a setup. Did you say that it changes every 2 years, Dan?
Well, I think that's some of the stuff we have to look at. I mean, if this concept is, the board thinks this size concept is good, we're going to have to go back and look at the governance charter and see what other additional changes we need to make. My experiences in other boards has been, and I think Jackie and I have talked about this before, is that you see it on a rotating cycle. So you see new members rotating in, like in cases of some boards every 2 years. In some cases of some boards, you have new members rotating in every year, right? Not everybody rotates. That way you get some longevity. The thought process behind having the 7 seats that are there was for some historical prosperity so that the history didn't die with the rotation. Right?
So why is there not a social service provider in addition to a behavioral health?
There was a lot of conversation about behavioral health filling that role or social services filling that role. And to do that conversation, we decided that behavioral health filled that role. That doesn't mean that has to be how it is. I'm just saying that there's so many social service providers, to pick one that's in a static seat might not seem equitable across the county, where behavioral health is a county-wide representation. That was
but even the 7 positions, they still roll off, right? I mean,
I think, Camille, I think that's important to note. When Dan said they would rotate through, we're talking about the at-large seats. So we are talking, this is a pretty significant change we would all be, going through here. Those 7 standing seats would be standing seats.
Forever?
Well,
until I guess forever.
I guess that doesn't make sense. Why would, maybe you could see them shift every 4 years or every 6 years, larger terms, but it doesn't make sense that the behavioral health provider has a standing seat forever and social services doesn't have any seat at all. And then you talk about substance abuse, but substance abuse can be included in behavioral health. And the same thing with individual lived experience and an individual lived experience of homelessness. It's like, I don't know.
Those ones are required. So that the
I
one
understand. I'm
thing
not
that's
saying it
required
shouldn't be there,
is that an
honey.
individual lived experience with
I'm not
homelessness be
saying
on the
it shouldn't
board.
be there. I'm saying that there should be rotation for the 7.
I think that we might need to remember, those of us that were at that team, on that team, I can't remember honestly why we made behavioral health provider a standing seat. And so
Well,
we,
I think it should be a standing
There's a
seat. I just think social
misunderstanding
services should be as
here.
well.
Can I just clarify one thing? Who is actually in those 7 seats will rotate.
Yes.
So
That's what
it's
I meant.
not, okay, I wanted to make sure that that was clear, that, you know, the housing authority seat, it'll rotate who is in that seat, but that there will always be some entity.
Yes, no,
always-
that's fine.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, I
great.
wanted to make
Thank
sure
you,
we had
Veronica.
that.
Veronica,
Okay.
that is extremely helpful. So how will those seats, and again, I think if you have behavioral health, which I definitely agree you need to have a standing seat for that, you probably need social services as well. So that's just my, last comment about that.
Yeah,
But
the way
but my question is, so when do they rotate? And when you say the person sitting in the seat rotates, does that mean that the agency rotates? Like,
yes.
Okay.
So when I say person, I mean agency. The agency would designate a person just like they do now, but the agency had could have the option to rotate through there. And we really, one thing, and I'll let you continue, but it's just before my brain.
No, that was it, hon. That was
rises,
it. Thank you, Dan.
Is that really there's really 5 social services seats, 8 through 12, that would rotate through different service activities, right? Depending on the at-large things. So they really have, in my thought process, they had more seats there than the ones at the top. But that's just, with the option of rolling through there, because there's a lot of agencies in town that, or in the county, that can handle more than one of the categories below, right? There's, and sometimes they cross deal with them below versus having, behavioral health, who's basically countywide.
That's a good point. It could be argued either way. And then, the last thing is, since we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of need, it seems like we should always make sure that somebody who's at the bottom of the rung of service providers, either outreach agencies or shelter agencies, or somebody who's doing the first line of defense, is represented. So it could still be an at-large seat, but filled by, how do you describe it? The safety net. So outreach teams, shelter teams, those who are the first line of defense for the homeless on the street.
Right. And that's, I think the objective was to recognize that agencies do multiple things, right? Like RCS does multiple things that are on the list below.
Sure.
McCavan, Manzanita, we're trying to break down the silos. So like, it doesn't, each individual group doesn't have to feel like they can only represent one of the bullet points below, right? And we may not have all the bullet points down there below.
Sure.
Right? But we have a majority of them, and it allows us to look at our organizations and how we can spread across more bullet points, or realistically how we do affect more bullet points, right? I mean, like take Rural Community Housing Development Corporation. We're not a rapid rehousing provider, but we've been finding creative ways to use rapid rehousing in our communities to get people housed, right? So I think there's a lot of crossover, especially in Mendocino County, between agencies. And sometimes that is problematic, right? Because there's limited funding and there's multiple agencies going for it. Most times it's not. Or we have the reverse now, where we have a ton of funding and not enough boots on the ground to use it all. So.
And is there a reason we don't have city or county? And last but not least, and then I will be quiet, are there, and I see that they're on the advisory groups invited to each meeting, so I appreciate that. Food organizations, so food shelter, food pantries, places that provide NCO, places like that.
That's a good question. We probably should add those at the category at large, because
I don't know. I don't know what to call
I agree.
that.
I think they're soup kitchens is kind of like the
Or
Mhm.
food outreach programs, maybe food outreach would capture the whole big bucket because there's plowshares, but then there's also NCO, but then there's also the food bank, and then there's also community providers on the coast that do it just on their own, both faith-based and non. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
anyway, my last comments, thank you. Dan, I really, this is hard work. So whatever happens, we're gonna,
Yeah,
that's
it's
the
not.
plan.
There's no perfect solution for this, and there's nothing to say that if the board says this is a good idea, we start looking at the governor's charter and how that works, and the technicalities behind that. And the group may be like, hey, this just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And in 2 years, we may look at this and go, that was a bad idea. We need to go back to what we were doing, right? I look at it as like cooking spaghetti, right? Sometimes you throw the spaghetti at the wall and it sticks for 5 seconds and you think it's done and it's still hard. At least that's how
And
I
then
think.
sometimes you choose to add sausage and other times you add,
Yeah.
something else. So, all right, I appreciate that. And I think leaving it at whatever decision we come to, if we find in a couple of years that doesn't work for us, then we go back to the charter and revise it.
Yeah, I think it's a living, I don't think the charter should be a document set in stone. I think we need to adapt to the times and adapt to, what we need to get done. And ultimately it's about the people we serve, not
Absolutely.
not who sits at the table. It's about the service. And when we lose that focus, then we start getting into unproductive stuff.
Amen.
And can I, just for clarity's sake, and the motivation for relooking at all this came originally from the original audit?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It came from the original audit basically saying we didn't have all the seats we needed. And
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out though, that the auditor wanted us to add 2 seats and instead we're like, we're not going to add any of the seats you wanted and doing something completely different. So it's kind of, we're not doing what the auditor wanted us to do.
That was
It's kind of doing
my
the
point.
opposite.
That was
Yeah,
kind
and
of my point, Meg.
Yeah, and so, because my other comment on this a little bit is just that I think there's been just this ongoing struggle ever since I've been on the COC to get people who are part of the general membership to ever attend the meetings or to participate in the committees or et cetera. So I don't see how this is going to be an expansion to draw more people in. I think you're going to have less people doing more of the work. I mean, that's the worst possible scenario. I'm just saying, it seems like there's been this, people tend to participate when they feel like they really have a voice and a vote in something. Otherwise they tend to say, why should I just go and watch other people make decisions that I'm just hearing about in the 3rd month or something? And I don't know.
Judy, I think it's a calculated gamble on our part because we thought by shrinking the board, more people would show up as members, not as board members, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Maybe, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they'll, yeah.
You might be right.
I think it's just the opposite. I would have gone with the auditor's suggestion and added 2 more seats.
yeah, I think there's a risk to that, Judy, but I also look at sitting on some of the committees, how many people actually show up to the committee meetings that are there, and there's not very many. I mean, up until this conversation, Veronica was having a hard time getting committee members to show up to the membership committee meeting. I mean, I think my participation, the strategic planning committee was the one that's been the most active in the last couple of years. I can't speak for the other ones because I'm not on all of them. So, but it is a risk. I mean, that is the risk we take. And the board could not act on this. It's just a suggestion from the committee.
I was thinking about what Camille had said, and I think we went to great length to put representing victim service provider, street outreach provider, emergency shelter provider, homeless prevention, with the idea that these were all programs where people who were in the trenches would be participating in the conversation, because I do think that's important. I also felt that we were hopeful that committees that formed would have strong leadership that actually challenged people to come to the committee meetings and work on things that were meaningful rather than just meet. And it probably depends on the year as to what really is gripping people on what's meaningful that year as far as housing or whatever. But I think, my thought always is that having committees work where it's meaningful. Now, I've been on 2 of these committees that this one, Dan, the one you've been heading, has been the most active. And so, but I'm not sure about why people don't come to a committee. Are they assigned? Is there a leader that gets people excited and brings them together and forms an action item that carries it forward? Or are they just meeting to talk? And I think if they're just meeting to say they've made a meeting, we all know how that is. Anyway, those are my 2 cents. Let me take my hand down.
Yeah, I think everybody's got a great point, and no matter how we do this, it's not going to be a perfect solution. I mean, it's not going to be perfect if we add more members. It's not going to be perfect if we shrink the board.
Well, it feels to me like I think this is an interesting conversation because the people who have not been at the membership committee so far have an input that's, I really want to value. And I think the concept of how do we get more engagement other than those of us who are always at the table, but outside of those of us who are already sitting here talking about this, how do we do that is a worthwhile conversation. And frankly, I'll keep pointing back to our strategic plan, but there's a whole part of our strategic plan around getting that engagement in the community and doing some outreach in ways that we can bring in more voices and get more input and share what we know as well, that we just haven't been able to do, honestly. And to me, the question is the board structure a way to get that input or not? Are we risking it by shrinking the board of having less? I think these are all really good questions. And I'm not really sure, but I would say, Dan, that maybe before this item closes, those of us who have to take the next step, would it be appropriate for the board to vote on whether we're on the right direction or not? Because I don't want to go really far down this road if it turns out that the majority of the board is not okay with this. So, or wants more work, or wants another draft from us. Like you want another draft, because we're not actually on a major timeline around this. I would like to get it done, but there's no, we already reported back to the auditor. We're not going to do what you want. We're going to do something else. So there's no, we don't have to, I would like clear direction from the board on whether you want us to keep working on this or come back with this. We need a little more here, which might come down to a vote. Are you thinking, Dan?
Yeah, I was getting the agenda back up on my screen because it got booted off with my email. I think we should take a consensus vote from the board of whether we're heading the right direction or not. I mean, I think this needs, after listening to the comments today, I think there is some more consideration we need to take into like looking how the governance charter would work with a shorter board and the cycle of that and how that would play out. And if it's even possible to make it work in an effective manner that makes forward progress, right, without hampering our ability to work, right? Because Judy is right. If this discourages people from showing up, then we just have even those less members that are going to sit on the meetings.
Right. I mean, it makes me think that if we're going to shrink the board, we may need to have some sort of accompanying commitment on how we're going to make sure that we don't lose input that we need. And I don't really have a clear vision in my mind of what that means, but something, so we don't have so worst case scenario, we shrink the board and like 3 people show up at the meetings and like, that's it. And we're like, we can't even quorum anyway. And we lost all these voices, right? Like that would be an unfortunate outcome. So we just want to make sure that doesn't happen.
I mean, my professional opinion is it needs to go back and we need to talk about it at the next meeting again, taking into consideration all the comments. I mean, the point was to have a discussion today. It's not, not to drive an action, because I mean, we could talk about this for the next 5 meetings as far as I care, right? We want something that works on the backside, not just push something through that's a change, because changing just for the sake of change has never been productive.
Yeah, this is Sandra from the VA. Because I work with several COCs, this is the first time that I heard one county that want to have less people in the board, because the reality is the attendance, commitment from different representatives that have been elected is sometimes difficult to have it every month. So, and this, I can also say it because I participate in several committees and I can see, like sometimes in the meetings, there are only three people, working on that. So I think that, or my recommendation will be that, think really about what is the step that you are going to do, because, if it's less people in the board, maybe you will not have many attendance. So that would be my point.
Okay. To answer Megan's question, though, I think this needs to go back to the committee level without any action from the board today. That's just.
Well, I have a proposed motion, and maybe you can scratch it, but I'd like to throw it out there. Move to direct the membership committee to continue with development of the presented board redesign draft.
I'm not sure
Basically
we really
saying-
need a motion to continue the discussion, but I mean, if the board wants to pose the motion, they're more than welcome.
So I would really love to hear from a few other board members who haven't, expressed any opinion whatsoever.
Is there going to be an opportunity for public comment? I'm not a board member, so that's why I'm not.
You can go ahead, Angelica.
So, I mean, I don't understand how the HCD person, number one, got confused, since the board, the definition of who has to be on the board has not changed for the last 9 years. And it's very simple. I mean, the board has to be representative of the relevant organizations and of projects serving homeless population, and it has to include at least one homeless or formerly homeless individual. And the issue I have with, one big issue I have is having a seat for the criminal justice system, a representative, and not having like seats for folks who provide direct services to folks, because it just gives, to me as somebody in the general public, the impression that we are prioritizing criminalization of the population versus folks with viewpoints, from that population, and dedicating seats for those folks versus having that dedicated that seat for the criminal justice rep, which I think is law enforcement, right? And I also agree in terms of, sorry, there's somebody doing the lawn out there. In terms of how, and I'm also speaking from the perspective, I'm not a board member. So generally I don't have a voice unless I have a vote. And it certainly makes it much more difficult as being, part of the Shelter and Solutions Committee. I can give you from my experience, not being a board member makes it much more difficult to figure out, what the board wants or needs.
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to share that in our meetings, in the discussion about the criminal justice representative seat, the thought was, if that seat was added to the at-large representation pool, that it might never get filled. And that we need to have law enforcement at the table with us, because we need to be able to know what's going on and have the opportunity to engage with them to make sure that the system is working the way that it's supposed to, and actually to try to have those conversations about the criminalization of homelessness, so that we can have a coalition where everyone's at the table, and so that conversation can be held across the board, instead of it happening here and then going to the criminal justice community and saying, this is what we've discussed. Instead of saying, this is what we've discussed, say, we want you to be part of our conversation.
I just want to, I want to echo what Veronica said here, because I was looking at this too, and I know we had intentional conversations about that very question, like why, really this membership committee was really interesting because we kept having like, well, why are they worthy of a, it was an awkward conversation. Who is worthy of a standing seat? And we were trying to say, it's not supposed to imply that these 5 entities are more important than any of the other ones. We were not, but I do think there's a risk of it looking that way. But that was not the intention at all. It was like, how do we get these people to the table otherwise? Which in the case of the criminal justice system, and I think it's a point well taken. I mean, we really did struggle with that. And why would these entities have a standing? Why would these entities have a standing seat as opposed to an at-large seat? We probably neglected to take enough notes to articulate that why each of these seats was, because I can't remember myself, and I was at the meetings. So that's on us to kind of maybe articulate that better, because we're having a hard time expressing it. At least I am right now.
Jackie?
Can you hear me? I'm having problems.
Yeah, we
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you
me?
now.
Good.
Yep.
So I wasn't a part of this committee, so if I talk about stuff you guys talked about in the committee, I apologize. But there's a lot happening in criminal justice with regard to homelessness. And I know we all bring our experiences with us, but I think having somebody at the table like Eisen, or the folks that are working with people in parole and probation, might really help all of us in the community that's trying to serve the underserved. So I just think, remember, what we've experienced in the past may change in the future, because resources are being redistributed in different ways. And I want us to be talking to each other so we optimize them. The other thing is, Dan and I had aspirations before COVID that we could literally do workshops and enrich this into a more vibrant, sharing community. And it's very hard to do that. I'm still looking forward to the time where we can try and build that. It's the bureaucracy associated with doing what we have to do for the state and the COC is taking, 80, 90% of our bandwidth, and we need to free some up for the other.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, Jackie, thank you so much, because I was the person who kept pushing this criminal justice representative to have it on this, because I feel the same way. There are so many parts of that whole system that interact with our populations at different points. And we've seen to put them in a safe box someplace else where they don't have to work collaborative with the community on these issues. So thank you for that. Yeah, that was my main comment. I too would think that a value would be having workshops and having these committees that look at things in more depth versus just, are we doing this one series of tasks? I know I always felt it's really nice to be part of a learning organization. They used to use that in a big way years ago, that we're a learning organization. And, I would make sure all my staff had like the tipping point and books like that we would read periodically and come back together and talk. So if this can lead to the realization that we're not putting these sets, this is the list, and this is how we're going to just get meetings together, and these people will represent their population, but leading to a better and more enriched conversation between people that don't have conversations except in small spaces.
We also decided to use criminal justice purposely. There was a lot of thought put into that. Law enforcement wasn't selected because we wanted to be more inclusive of more groups. So like Carly has mentioned in the chat here, this can include the district attorney, the public defender, any entity that is involved in the criminal justice system, not just law enforcement.
Thank you, Veronica. So just listening to this and looking, for the sake of time, we're going to take this back to the committee, and we'll put this agenda item on the next agenda for next month, because we have some other stuff on here we need to get through. So thank everybody for your input. If you do have any other additional input besides outside of this, feel free to email myself or Veronica or Jackie on that. We're going to skip the public comment, see if there's any public comment on this topic really quickly before we skip off to back up to Brian's report.
So just so I can clarify that for the minutes, Dan, it sounds like you're referring this whole topic back to the committee for further discussion.
Yes.
And that if somebody has some input, we would welcome it. I would ask them to CC Veronica unless there's some reason they don't want to, just so she can have all those notes correlated.
Yeah, that's what I said. Send it to myself, Veronica, or any, or Jackie as the chair.
We'll take another stab at it. At the very least, we'll come back with a little more like clarity on the choices that were made.
And this conversation could go on for meetings. It's not a point of coming to a conclusion right now.
Right.
Kate has her hand up again.
Kate, did you have something else, or did you just not take your hand down?
You're muted, Kate.
You're still muted, Kate. You're pulling my trick.
I must take my hand down. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay,
I can have to lower my hand down here in the first place. So
no worries.
Okay.
Brian, welcome. We were going to wait for you to go over back up to standing committees on the request assistance for formal HMS lead evaluation.
Sure, and there's two things the committee are bringing. That's one of them. The first is there should be a formal review of the HMIS lead agency annually, and that expectations coming from HUD, our TA partners. It's never been done in our COC. That kind of work should come out of the COC committee. I brought that to our last committee meeting. I can't in good faith review myself as the HMIS lead agency. That's just not best practice to review yourself. The committee right now is, our membership is pretty low. Pretty much we get Sandra from the VA, and then we get a lot of participation from CDC. But the members of the committee who are participating, which are very few, felt like they didn't have the expertise or skill set to formally review the HMIS lead agency. Attached to your packet, there's a whole HUD document on how this has to be done. It gives you a lot of guidance. Some of it doesn't apply to our committee. The HMIS lead and COC lead would be willing to help someone navigate this document, but the committee is requesting that they assign an ad hoc or a board member or someone to take lead on this activity, as the committee feels they're not able to do it in a meaningful way or a way that is going to work out well. And again, as the committee chair, I can't in good faith review my own HMIS lead agency. And so they brought this to the board to request help doing this formal review of the HMIS lead agency. And
Brian, what's the time expectation?
There's no deadline for it. The time expectation is we should start doing this once a year. So it's February.
Well, this looks like so much fun. I'm sure that Dan's going to fight with me over volunteering for it.
No. And so the committee's not telling the board how to pursue with it. The committee does want to bring it back to the board that they're not able to do this work that's been identified as important for our community to make sure that the lead agency is operating in adherence and meeting the needs of the community.
Thank you, Brian. So is your recommendation, Brian, that we do an ad hoc committee to just do the review on an annual basis?
And it might be an ad hoc committee that takes the lead now, and maybe it's something if the HMS committee gets up and running or someone else ever takes chair. I think for this year, it would be the best direction for the board to figure out someone to do the work, since the committee is saying they're unable to, whether that's an ad hoc or just appointing someone to be in charge of it would be up to the board. But I think we could benefit from a review of our HMIS lead agency. Anecdotally, I would love to review myself. I think I'm my best critic, but again, it just doesn't look good. The metrics are terrible when you review your own agency.
Thank you, Brian. Although I would agree, I think you would be your best critic. Is there any thoughts from the board? Jackie, Judy?
Well, I was just thinking, I'd like to read through it. I haven't read through it and then come back with a proposal.
Okay.
I
we
was
can do
worried
that.
when I saw the scope of it that this was an urgent thing.
We can do that for next meeting. Veronica, can we, or Carly, can we put that back on the agenda for next meeting?
Yeah, and to be clear, we're committed to helping whoever is in charge or leading the work. If you don't understand the questions, explaining them better. Some of that doesn't even apply to our community, or it's things that it's a really big generic HUD document that can be used on any HMIS lead agency. So there's a little bit of fine tuning that needs to be done. And both the HMIS committee and HMIS lead are committed to helping and being part of the process.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Is there any public input, any questions for Brian on that, or we will discuss it at the next meeting?
There was one other issue that the committee asked to bring forward to the board if we're through the HMIS lead evaluation.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have been exploring gathering tribal affiliation when a client answers yes to Native American, Indigenous, Alaska Native. And the committee's decided they think it would be a good idea in our community to start asking that question for every project that participates in HMIS, and to start gathering client data for several reasons, including being able to refer to services properly, affiliations back to tribes, as well as racial equity and things like that. But it's a really big decision. It's something that doesn't live just at the HMIS committee. This comes out of some work we're doing with Northern Circle, and for their projects, they're looking at having tribal drop downs for the tribal members they represent so they can get some custom data. And if we're taking that step to make that sort of custom tribal drop down, it's something we could apply to our entire COC for a lot of different reasons: cultural representation, congruency with client, and self-image. But again, it's really big picture. So it's something the committee's bringing back to the board to make sure we review it in a big picture way. We're getting the right stakeholders and people involved if we do what we're asking in a culturally informed and sensitive way. So to really review the process, if we want to add tribal affiliation for every project in HMIS in Mendocino County, to ask that question. Clients always can answer decline, doesn't know, refuse. So it's never going to be a requirement, but it would be an optional data source to dig deeper into tribal affiliation and tribal identity in our community.
Unless you need an actual motion, I think there was a consensus of the board earlier when Veronica went over this in a brief manner, that was a good idea.
Oh, I missed that one. I apologize.
That's okay. I think it's important enough we can talk about it twice.
Sure. So the next steps from the HMIS aspect would be exploring it to determine how we gather that information, how the question gets asked, and then determine what tribal entities should be represented in that drop-down menu. Of course, you can always have another option. And so getting the right stakeholders and public members involved in those conversations.
Okay. And I'm under the impression that the TA would help in that process, Brian, at that point.
I mentioned that Chris has reached out to us about how to interact with tribal entities, and that technical assistance training he was offering.
Some of that's going to help, but none of that TA is targeted towards gathering tribal affiliation as a data point. So that's a custom decision we would be making as a community, and it's much bigger. So the tribes can ask for their projects to gather tribal information, but this would be making it so every HMIS project in our community, when someone answers yes to Native American, Indigenous, Alaska Native, is asked that follow-up question if they identify as a tribal member. So it'd be bigger picture than the projects that HUD TA is being provided for.
Starting point, though. They can help us get started.
Okay.
I know.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian? Okay, we're going to go back down to section E, review of COC quarterly standing report and performance profile.
So the last 3 pages of your packet, pages 69, 70, and 71, pertain to this item. HUD has started sending these two reports to every COC primary contact person to bring to the COC for review. So this is the first page is a spreadsheet list of all of the COC competition awards that have been awarded to entities in our COC. Looks like it goes back to 2015. And so it gives you a report out of what the project name is, what type it is, how long it lasts, what the start and end dates are or were, how much was originally contracted, what the current balance is, and if there's going to be any recapture of the grant funds. So I wanted to bring that up for your guys' review. And then the last two pages they include as well. It's a performance profile. It's a brief synopsis of it shows our jurisdiction, and then the housing inventory that we had, separates it by, basic category. It's got our point in time count through 2020, so 16 to 20, average length of time homeless, and different metrics like that. So this is really an update for you guys. And there's one more page. The last page is a detail data that was used to create the two pages of charts. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, not seeing any questions from Veronica. Is there any public input on this topic?
Do we have an idea of kind of the older grants that were never spent down at all or spent down poorly? Which of these we can recapture in the future, or which of these are completely lost?
So I think when you look at this report, the CDC has control of the services only ones. That's actually not, that's not a county contract. That's a contract with the CDC. For the program that I feel like the county somehow, there was some sort of mishap with one of them back in 2016. If I'm not looking at the form right now. So Brian, I guess what I was going to say is the short answer is they're pretty lenient with the last couple years, but if you somehow neglected to spend from like 4 years ago, it's a little bit harder. And that might be impossible. So, the timelines on it, as Veronica said, are really weird, but you don't just get to, if there is a use it or lose it moment at some point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, not hearing any questions or any input. I go to a brief discussion on the COC Facebook page, Veronica.
Yeah, so when I was doing advertising and promoting for the point in time count, one of the things I did was we have a news media person here at Social Services. They're wonderful, very helpful. They offered to put information on the county's Facebook page, and I was like, yeah, and I've done one over in the COC page. So if you wanna copy that one, no problem. Well, that alerted them somehow that that there's a social media account that's ran by county staff that's not on behalf of the county. And so I was sent a pretty extensive amount of information regarding the county's internal policies. There has to be a plan. There's a lot of documentation and processes that could potentially change how our Facebook page, how the COC's Facebook page is ran and operated. So We're kind of feeling like the county staff probably should not be operating the COC's Facebook page because we don't want the COC's public communications to be, governed by the county. I mean, it's a different entity. And so we wanted to bring this up for discussion with the board, see what you guys thought, how we should move forward. There's a couple of options that we can do. We can just scratch it and delete it and be done with it and just not have one. We could pause it and just, put a post up that this is, this page isn't being active and refer to like the website and the YouTube page, or we could have somebody else take it over. Those are really the three options, but I just don't see county staff continuing to operate it as an option. Did I get it, Megan and Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets very little traffic. Once you have a Facebook page and it sometimes getting more traffic maybe isn't great because then there's a whole comment monitoring process. I'm not trying to squash communication, but I don't know if social media for the COC makes the most sense in terms of our messaging. I think social media has a lot of value in a lot of settings. I just don't see the connection here quite as strongly, but whatever the board decides.
Can provide like a 2-minute historical outlook. So the Facebook page, I created it in 2016 with a little bit of board direction back then. I had access to it. I think Kale Loftus was helping run it. And it's being used very regularly, really just to repost other agencies' posts and do really important stuff like the point in time post. And it's existed as a place, if you search for homeless services or continuum care on Facebook, it gives you a link back to the website where you can really get all your information. The primary purpose it's been serving is redirection. So it's not used in a very engaging manner. We can give metrics and reports on how often it gets visited, but it is pretty low. But it has provided some people a roadmap to getting to the right place to access services or ask the right questions throughout time.
Any thoughts from the board members besides mine? Because I'm not a social media proponent. I grew up at the time I'm not social media, so.
I'll just say, just for an opposing perspective, that social media is the way in which people communicate. And so I think we can make things appropriate for the message we're trying to send, but it's the way to get information out there in a way that people will actually see it. The point in time count is a perfect example. Trying to get the word out there about what was going on and recruit volunteers. It's a really important forum to do that.
So I think
I agree with you, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think that it is a good format to reach some people, or at least like you're saying, Brian, a way that if people searched it, it could connect them to other supports. But if you don't have someone to monitor all of those comments, I think that it needs to be made very clear. This is not a page for comments or engagement. It will not be, I don't know, that it's not monitored, or there are some, I believe if you create it as a certain page where the comments are limited, or you can take the comments off altogether.
And you can do those options. Really, the important thing here for us at the county level is if we're going to continue to monitor it, it has to go through a whole county formal process, and it's just not going to be worthwhile to have county media kind of overseeing COC business. So even if being used in a limited capacity, it's going to take some sort of interest from a COC member to want to even do the bare minimum of just reposting or doing the most important posts once every month or so, or whatever that looks like. If it continues to live, it just should live outside of being governed by Mendocino County.
Is this the county's?
I think
Is this the county's Facebook page? Or,
yeah, I think
or the COC's? I'm sorry.
It's the COC's, Libby.
The COC, okay.
The COCs. So what I'm thinking is all of us that have a Facebook page, like for important things like point in time count, we could put it You know, we could still get the word out and speak to our communities in the most effective way without that.
I think, you know, I think that the reason this is an issue is that the COC exists in the strange space, right? It's staffed by county staff members. It's kind of called the Mendocino County Continuum of Care, but it's supposed to be an independent body. So the question that was asked to Veronica, I mean, Libby, you said, is this a county page or a COC page? And the question that was asked to Veronica and Brian and I are, is this a county page? And we were like, no, kind of. And then they were like, but are you the administrators? And we were like, yes. So then it's, you know, county staff can't be the administrators if it's, that makes it a county page. And we have to go through the county processes. And we just know that's not gonna, we don't want to do it. So it's going to be an independent thing. It needs to be managed by an independent administrator who's not a county staff person.
Then it sounds like
Could this perhaps be something that the membership committee does because it's outreach, could be considered outreach?
Problem is Veronica is the chair of that, Amanda.
Really, the question is, what the question they were asking us is, who is the, like in a social media site, there's somebody who is the administrator who has powers. And they said, who is the administrator? And I was like, not us. And Brian's like, well, it is me. So that is the issue. Who is going to be what's called the administrator role of this page?
Well, if we just need somebody to fill the administrator role, then just put my name in the hat and just say I'm the administrator of it, but somebody else gonna have to help me because I personally despise social media. But I do agree with Amanda and Jackie that it is important for the type of stuff we do. So
to be clear on commitment, I spend maybe 20 minutes a month kind of reposting or making one important post. It's very low bar. It could be used in a much bigger, more meaningful way if the COC chooses to go that way, but to keep it as just kind of a placeholder that leads back to a website and make the most important updates, it's like 15 minutes a month.
So again, though, when something crazy happens on that Facebook page, I need to be able to say it's not a county page. Brian's not responsible for the craziness. So that's the thing that we got to be clear on.
Historically, there's never been any sort of NIMBYism or big comment fight just because it's so infrequently used. The one thing you watch out for is sometimes it'll get a message from someone looking for direct services, please help me. So the one of those I get every 9-10 months, I just redirect to the most appropriate resource with a message saying, oh, this page is just for information. Go to this website to find out more about this. It's a very minimal time investment, and it hasn't been a mess in the last 5 years since it was created. Not to say that it can't be as homeless services kind of ramps up as an issue in our community.
And there's just a lot of information that would have to be synthesized and input in order to meet the county requirements. So maybe just having an information page, like Brian's saying, like just to direct people, but nothing that has to be monitored and nobody can comment on it and anything like that might just be the way to go. Nobody monitors it. It's not a
But
page.
can't that be done on the website and you don't need Facebook?
Yes, but people are going to go to Facebook looking for it. And that way they find something when they go to Facebook.
I guess what I'm saying is unless somebody independent from the county staff want to take over as administrator, and Dan, I appreciate that you would be like, you can just call me the administrator, but you'd actually have to be the administrator and we would have to
I'd
take
be the
us off.
administrator, but I'll tell you right now, it's not unless Brian or you or another agency associated with the COC needs something posted on there. It's not going to have a ton of activity because I've not found from all my days at the racetrack and other business opportunities that Facebook and people having the ability to freely post their opinions has ever been productive for me. So
to be clear, it doesn't get a ton of activity currently. So it's already at that model you're talking about of just being a placeholder.
Then I'll gladly do it, Megan and Veronica, to get the county out of the loop and still have it there for use until we get to further conversation on it.
That could work for me, Veronica, you think? If so we'll make you the administrator, Dan, and then we'll take our people off and I'll tell the county that it's not a county site and we don't have administrative powers over it anymore.
Yep.
The one thing I would point out is you need to have a Facebook account.
I do.
Okay, that's all you need then.
Merely for watching funny memes. That's it.
And I would suggest, just because Amanda is more clued into the younger population, if she wants to be a co-administrator, she might be a good fit.
Oh, she could be the administrator if she wants.
There can be more than one administrator.
We can add the entire board. You can add as many
No, let's
people
not
as
do
you
that.
want.
That's
I'm not a Facebook guru.
We're gonna give it to Dan, and then it's on Dan from there.
Yeah, Dan, you do what you want, Dan.
Don't give me that much leeway.
Okay.
Great.
Ready for me to dive in, Dan?
Yeah, I was just looking to see if there's any. We're going to go on to funding. Is there any public comment on the Facebook page? No. All right. Do you want to dive into funding, Veronica?
Noticing it's 3:20, Veronica. I have to leave right at 3:30. So I was just wondering, maybe
You do heat first. You do heat first.
Okay, I'm going to do heat really quickly. This is F4. So this is more just of a notification to the board. The City of Fort Bragg's Plateau HEAP funded units. This was, so just to bring us all back in time a minute. The COC allocated $3 million to the Plateau project, which is built and ready to have people move in soon, which is super exciting. 20 of those units are units set aside for currently homeless individuals. And I'm going to be super transparent. There was the train for filling those units left the station. This is the phrase we're using, before some of us were aware of it. And some of the processes in our contract were not followed, namely using the coordinated entry process to fill those units. So that did not happen the way it was supposed to. What we're trying to do now is kind of get us back on track for the future, for filling future vacancies for those units. And because it was a contract, it was funding approved by the COC, and there was, it did not meet this element of the contract, we're going to have to do some sort of notification to the contractor, in this case, the City of Fort Bragg, about that this did not happen. We're noticing and noting that it did not happen, and what the plan is for moving forward. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I did want to notify you all that is in place, because I know some of you were aware that coordinated entry was not used for the selection process. And I'm letting you know we're now aware of it too, and trying to figure out how to get it back on track for the future. Any comments there?
Only comment I have, Megan, and this is just me commenting as me, is that we need to find a way to make there's some teeth in our contracts that people just can't blatantly ignore what they sign, because it's very clearly stated in every contract there that said it had to go through the coordinating process. And I continually see contracts just get bullied through just because people don't want to deal with the complications. Now, having said that, it is easy to miss some stuff in the contract, but I think HEAP was very clear in the very beginning about coordinating entry and preferences. So I think we just need to figure out a way in the future to, as the COC, enforce that a little more effectively. That's all. Brian?
I think that point's really well taken, Dan, and I agree. And I was thinking to myself, how could we have prevented this? And it's probably incumbent upon really the county as people who have the contract also to kind of check in on this stuff. I do want to be really clear for the record that when we were aware that the process was not going through the coordinated entry process, the City of Fort Bragg, who is the contractor, was willing to stop the train and say, okay, if we're not doing it, we can stop it. But at that point, it was really our judgment that at that point it was going to disrupt the project more than was necessary. And so I do want to acknowledge for their sake that they were like, okay, we're doing, we'll stop this if we need to, but it was the judgment of the people involved to just let it be, because it was so far down the process. And very honestly, we don't feel like our coordinated entry system is as responsive as we would like it to be for these specialty projects. And we're getting closer to having that in place. So had I felt like, hey, we're totally ready to go on this, I think we probably would have insisted that they redirect and use the coordinated entry system as it's stated in their project. But it's still a learning process. And I agree though, Dan. And there actually are some other things that we are noticing now in reviewing that contract that we are able to get back on track because we were paying attention. It also sets us up to because we have the same issue coming up with, it's not an issue, but the same expectation coming up with the Ore Creek 2 projects, which were funded by HEAP, have an expectation of using coordinated entry. Roughly the same number of units. I actually can't remember how many units there are
There's
that need to be
19.
filled by formerly homeless
There's
individuals.
19.
How many, 19, Dan? So, you know, we're going to be holding our CHDC to that contract expectation. And we are actually, this has prompted Brian to develop a draft workflow so that we can try to make this accomplish everybody's goals. Like use coordinated entry the way it's intended, have the design of the project, welcome the participants that will be successful there with the support that they need, and try to get this to really work the way it's supposed to.
I agree. I just think it's got to be equitable to all the players of the field, not
Yeah.
just the players that want to follow the contracts.
Right.
That's all I have to say.
I agree. And this HEAP one was particularly messy because our contract was with the city of Fort Bragg. Danco was in communication with the CDC, who was helping to manage the project-based units, and the communication did not happen the way it should have.
Yeah.
So that was a learning process for us. You know, again, we don't have a contract relationship with Danco. We only have a contract relationship with the city of Fort Bragg.
I understand.
So it's been rocky. This one's been rocky from the beginning, though. Let me tell you, all the way back at the beginning, this one's
All right.
rocky.
I
So
know.
yeah.
Ryan?
I just wanted to be really clear that the ball was dropped between the city of Fort Bragg and the county, and that CDC, by the time you get to them, they're like 2 agencies removed. It's through no fault of their own. So I just wanted to make sure that that's identified, that CDC's contract is with Danco and they're operating within
I don't
that
think there's
contract.
I don't think there's anything to blame fault. What I just want to say is in general, I continue to see, and Jackie can correct me, but I continue to see contracts that we write up. And just because certain individuals or certain agencies don't feel they want to abide by the whole entire contract after it's awarded, they're going to bully through because there's no teeth of enforcement of you writing that contract back. That's
I think
all.
you're right, Dan. Not only I think sometimes, you know, people just don't read their contracts, right?
Yeah.
So that happens over and over
Lisa?
again. I'm like, it's right there in the contract. So that culture of like, when you get a contract, make sure you continue to read it is something that we as the county need to continue to remind people in all the contracts we do. It's not just like
Yeah, we even miss stuff here at our CHTC all the time. I just
Right.
do some stuff we missed.
like, go back to your contract, see what it says.
Lisa?
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say. I don't think anyone intentionally did not follow the contract. I think that, you know, we had long conversations with our developer, in this case, Danco, and they did not seem aware of this piece of the puzzle. So it's unfortunate that we didn't find out until like literally we had already advertised and gone through our entire process and made all of our forms. So, you know, CDC is obviously, we're pro coordinated entry and we want to help in any way that we can. So I appreciate those comments. And again, I don't know that it was an intentional disregard for the contract. I think it was just something that was an oversight. And I agree, we do have to take closer attention to, you know, those contract obligations. So that's it.
Yeah, mine was a general comment. It's not just about HEAP.
Yeah.
It's about.
Of course.
Well, I think, Dan, that what happens, I'm noticing, is that people want things to be a certain way. Like they want, you know, and it's like, you don't always get to do exactly what you want. So, you know, the city of Fort Bragg really wanted only Fort Bragg residents in this certain way. And I'm like, you know, everyone wants that, right? So it's this kind of balance between what people think and want should happen in the homeless services world and what the rules actually say. And
Yeah.
they're not always in alignment.
I agree.
Probably most of the time they're not.
Any questions for Megan on HEAP before we move on to the next one?
Well, I just want to make a comment that, you know, it's unfortunate because as we move forward, we don't know how long those folks are going to stay in those particular spots. And so maybe others that have been waiting a lot longer, or the need is a lot stronger for those people to get housing, just is really unfortunate. And as we move forward, we're then going to have to figure out a way, like you're saying, to set up that process better to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
I will just say, you know, when we looked at the poll list for who was polled for that project, it is the demographics we were hoping to help. So it is, I mean, that was reassuring to me, you know, that whether those individuals make it through the rest of the application process remains to be seen, but definitely the people that were polled on that list of 60 included, you know, longtime homeless with a lot of complicated needs. So.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Veronica.
I just wanted to point out that there is on the agenda space for update on RCHDC's Oar Creek Commons, but it's going as planned, and we were working with Dan and Rachel. Is that who it is? Rebecca. On how coordinated entry is going to be used for that project. And I want to go ahead. Are we done with HEAP?
Yes.
I want to go ahead and move on to the next one before going back to the top. For the California Emergency Solutions and Housing Grant, or CATCH. In our 2019, the second allocation of CATCH funding, there was 98,000 and some change identified for HMIS and coordinated entry system improvements. The COC board gave direction to use it for coordinated entry since we have so much HMIS other funds available. Megan and I were discussing how we could get some infrastructure and setup done immediately. I'm in the process of issuing a request for qualifications, or RFQ, to identify some administrative assistants, professional service providers is what we're calling them, to help with COC design specific projects. And in one of those is a coordinated entry lead and a coordinated entry manager. And really, it's the coordinated entry manager piece that's missing, that is having such a broad impact or hindrance of new projects opting into coordinated entry. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of administrative, and we just don't have anybody to do it. The RFQ is designed to find somebody, but it's a slow process. And so the idea that Megan and I had today was creating a small contract under $25,000 for 6 months with a contractor or a TA provider that specializes in coordinated entry, and partner with them or contract with them to build a coordinated entry management plan, and to get the system ready for a manager to take it on. Because right now, county staff can't do it. We're barely keeping up with what we currently have. We can't take on coordinated entry. And it's really, really impacting our ability to really bring on new projects. And so I'm looking for direction, or really just a thumbs up from the board today, to pursue finding through an exception to bid process, finding someone who can help us with that implementation work, knowing that they could potentially be the long-term list manager, but they would need to respond to the RFQ, and that the RFQ is going to identify who's going to do it long-term, but we need somebody in now. What do you guys think about me looking in that and developing a contract? You would have the opportunity to give like formal board action when the contract is developed, so we wouldn't have to do that. We don't need a motion to move forward. I just want direction. Is this okay? Should I do this? Should I not?
Okay.
I think this sounds like a good idea, particularly if you can locate somebody fairly quickly and it's not a long drawn out thing. I think 25,000 for 6 months, you might only need somebody for like 3 months, but I think you're right that these are the small pieces that are small that turn out to be the hindrance of moving forward. That can be way too frustrating in the end for everybody, because so you see this person as being an independent contractor who would only work specifically on this. And so you need somebody with knowledge and experience and skills in this space.
One of the businesses that I've spoken with and informed that we're having an RFQ come up is called the ICA, the Iowa Alliance, wait, I have it up. Institute for Community Alliances. And they're in multiple states. Their primary is in Iowa. They do the coordinated entry system for the Iowa balance of state. They also do HMIS systems and things like that. So they're one of the people I was going to reach out to and see if they would be interested in helping us with this. But I have some ideas. So it's, and really this, I don't want to violate any procurement or any of those regulations that apply to this. So it's really, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can be and not do any of those violations, but we need somebody before we can take really formally get somebody in.
I would think because it's a unique knowledge, you're okay on that. Have you ever seen that management plan? Do you have that in your mind or in all of your wanderings with the technical assistance people? Have you seen a management plan?
I haven't really looked for one either. I know that there's a lot of guides to develop them.
And there were a few I saw, Jackie, and I don't remember what COCs, but there were some on some of those websites of the 30 plus COCs in the state. But like I said, that was a rabbit hole that I could have spent 6 months reading everything that I just did not physically have the time to do.
Well, I think when we contract for somebody to build a plan, we're going to have to tell them our definition of plan. So
yeah,
having
absolutely.
some examples. Okay.
And that's the part that I would be working with our coordinated entry TA that we have for rapid rehousing. I can include that in some of the work that I'm doing with them.
Okay, I think it's a good idea. Is there any other comments or concerns, questions?
Objections?
Yeah, objections?
I think we just need to be mindful that coordinated entry is very specific to your community. So whatever help we get, they're going to need a lot of people lifting them up in their work because they're not going to know our community's resources. And that's something you can't write like a basic guide on because every community is different as far as to how coordinated entry works in their community, what resources it has access to, and what projects they have in their community.
I just have a question. This is Angelica. Who is the list manager? This is kind of a basic one. Who?
It doesn't exist.
So that's very problematic, right?
Yes.
It's supposed to be coordinated. And there's... Wow.
It's kind of been the HMIS lead historically, but as we expand and it gets more and more complicated, we're seeing it's not work that's appropriate for the HMIS lead. And it's also something we're just starting to lack capacity to do on top of it not being best practice.
And the HMIS lead is the county?
Yes.
Yes.
And Angelica, I think that's some of the problems that goes back with like the HEAP contract or those types of things that come up because they would have, the list agency would have known, hey, this stuff has to be taken care of, right?
You could even put in the contract, contact this person and make sure that you collaborate with them when developing your tenant selection process.
On Oak Creek Phase 2, for example, we have No Place Like Home on there, which is also has a coordinate entry requirement. So really HEAP coupled on top of that is not any different because we already have that obligation through No Place Like Home, which is new MHSA funding. I don't say new, this stuff come around. We're in 4th round of it right now. So I would say go ahead and move forward with it, Veronica.
Okay, thank you. Can I move on to the next funding source?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to move back up to the COC program. I heard through the grapevine that they've completed review of the 2021 COC program applications, but we haven't heard anything back yet. So just waiting for them and no other updates on that one. Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG. For the annual competition HCD has also completed review of their applications, and we're waiting for their final announcement that's supposed to come middle of March. I've been working diligently on ESG CV contracts and reporting to HCD. We got an email last week requesting a formal letter to request extending our date, our last date to spend funds from July 30th, 2022 to September 30th, 2022. So we all get to spend up through the end of September. There's also discussion at the federal level of potentially extending that September 30th date, but I haven't heard anything. There hasn't been anything else besides that one notice that HUD is considering it. So I know that I can report that all contracts will be able to go through the end of September. So that's good news. But that's really the only concrete thing that I can give as far as our expenditure timelines go with HCD. Contracts are going to the Board of Supervisors, trying to get them done, working back with all those individual contracts. And point in time count really stole a lot of my time and attention. So those of you who I haven't been in contact with recently and I need to, my apologies. I'm going to be doing a bunch of catch up this week. Anything on ESG? Questions, comments? Okay, HAP, the Homeless Housing Assistance Program from the state. They have issued the HAP round 3 initial disbursement standard agreement. So that's working here in our contracts department, getting all those internal signatures so that we can get that initial allocation of a little over $500,000 that's to be used for COC planning and different coordination, and we could do a gaps analysis, things like that. So it's going to fund a lot of the items that are on the upcoming RFQ that aren't coordinated entry or HMIS related. And the former agency used to be called the Housing and Community or Finance Council. They've changed their name. They're now the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, or CAL-ICH. And we have a meeting scheduled with them on March 24th. It's myself, Megan, Becky, and Stephen from Social Services, Adult and Aging Services, Dan and Jackie, so that we can talk to them as joint applicants about meeting HAP round 3 requirements. There's some things that we're going to need to tweak in our strategic plan to be able to meet the requirements that the state has identified in their regulations for HAP round 3. So it's all in alignment with what we're currently doing. It's kind of speeding up a little bit of our process. We'll have to get some performance measurements identified. So some targets that our COC wants to meet. So that's stuff that we've been talking about for a while. So I'm kind of excited to have that prompted for us. Any questions on HAP? And then the last one is the HUD HMIS capacity building grant. Things are going good, and they've announced that they will be offering an extension that hasn't been offered yet through June 30th, 2023. So that should be enough time for us to finish up the plans that we had identified in there. And if anybody has any questions about that, what those activities are, you can let me know. And that's all the funding updates I have.
Is there any other questions on funding if somebody skipped one or didn't get a question in them? No, thank you, Veronica.
Welcome.
Is there any projects that's not on the agenda anybody wants to talk about? Not seeing any. Is there any agency announcements from anybody? Okay, not seeing any. The next board meeting will be Monday, March 21st at 1:30.
Amanda came off mute. Amanda, did you have something to add?
Thanks for noticing. I didn't want to interrupt. This is a really quick update, and I'll follow up with Veronica to get some flyers out. But the Youth Project will be holding our annual art auction in April. So any of you who know of kiddos in the community who are artists who would like to sell some of their art, they can contact me and I'll get the flyer out to Veronica. How it works is they submit their art, we have an auction, they get half of the value of whatever the art sells for. The other half goes to a scholarship fund that we have that in May we'll be awarding to kids graduating high school who fit our mission statement population for either going to college or trade schools or other worthy post high school plans. So Veronica, I'll get that out to you. You could send it to your listserv, but yeah.
I checked with Dan. He said he'd post it on the Facebook for sure.
I have a sense.
I'm gonna hold you to that, Dan.
I have a sense that I'm dragging Amanda into this, so she just doesn't know it yet.
I'll do what I can.
My daughter, who's 21, always tells me I'm Facebook inept, so. All right, thank you, Amanda, for that announcement.
Thank you.
So the next meeting will be March 21st of 2022 at 1:30 p.m. here on Zoom. Again, hopefully at some point we'll get to go back in person, but not right now.